Okay, let's go to the next part here about fusion. We've talked about the LK99 superconductor, and we've got some more news on fusion, which is kind of the holy grail of power, of recreating the core of the sun, which I think is pretty cool whenever you say it out loud. Let's put this up there on the screen. U.S. scientists have now actually repeated and replicated the fusion power breakthrough, which excited the world just last year. As a catch-up, it has achieved, quote, net energy gain in a fusion reaction for the second time, fueling optimism that progress is being made towards the dream of limitless zero carbon power. Physicists have sought since the 1950s to harness the fusion reaction that powers the sun. Until just December of 2022, no group had ever been able to do it in terms of energy from the reaction that it consumes, which is known as ignition. So, researchers at the federal Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California, who actually achieved this ignition last year, repeated it on July 30th, producing higher energy output than actual input. Now, there's still quite a long way to go. And just if anybody's interested in the mechanics, quote, achieved by heating two hydrogen isotopes, usually deuterium and tritium, to such extreme temperatures that the atomic nuclei fuse, releasing helium and vast amounts of energy in the form of neutrons. Really fun to have this actually happen right after the movie Oppenheimer. And what they talk about is that it is, quote, one of the most impressive scientific feats already of the 21st century. And if they can not only continue to replicate the experiment on a consistent basis, but then try to make it cost-effective, scalable, and of course safe everywhere, it could unlock, of course, literally quite like limitless energy and allay a lot of the concerns that we have and change superconductors if that technology all works out. So it's a really exciting time, I think. And it's always important, look, everyone hears about crazy breakthroughs. I even said this on the superconductor. You got to wait for replication. We're still waiting on that, by the way. But when you do have at least one, verified instance of this happening again, you could say, hey, maybe in a decade, it'll get to prototype stage. And I know that that's very frustrating for people to kind of take in that timeline. But, it's like energy wasn't built, Rome wasn't built in a day. Like oil took, decades really to catch on really from its discovery. So these things move at a slower timeline than we might want. But that doesn't mean that 30, 40 years from now, we won't be living in a very different reality.
Yeah, so to put this really simply in terms of the science, so, if you saw Oppenheimer, that was all about splitting the atom apart. That's fission. This is fusion, which is taking two atoms, two lighter atoms, and making them into one. So it's sort of like the opposite of the nuclear reactions that we have been able to achieve for both good and ill. So in terms of what this would mean, based on, we covered the original ability, the original test case where they were able to achieve this sort of increase in energy, which is like the gold standard for proving this out as a concept of something that could potentially work for energy generation in the future. They say these reactions emit no carbon, produce no long-lived radioactive waste. That's obviously an issue with nuclear power. And a small cup of the hydrogen fuel could theoretically power a house for hundreds of years. Also, in a hopeful sign, this replication of the initial experiment, they were actually able to generate somewhat more energy than they were the first time around, which moves it one step closer to, being out of the lab and into some sort of a practical application, because that energy loss in terms of, if you're able to actually produce this on a commercial capacity, it's still a very, very, very difficult challenge to solve. But the fact they were able to increase the amount of energy that they obtained here is an encouraging sign. So want to temper expectations, like you were saying, Saagar, it's still a long time before they'd be able to figure out how to make this use for, commercial applications or household applications, et cetera. We are a long way from that. But the fact that this wasn't a one-off, that they were able to recreate it, is really exciting and very encouraging.
Yeah, the jump from the theoretical to the engineering side is kind of interesting. So right now, one of the ways that they achieve it is through lasers. And one of the only reasons they can do it once a day is because the laser needs to cool down. The problem is that to actually make this scalable and commercially viable, you can't just use the laser once a day. You have to use it, quote, several times a second. And so getting from a point where you can use it once a day to several times a second sounds like a little bit of an engineering challenge in order to try and make this commercially viable. Who knows if we'll ever even be able to get there, but it certainly does sound cool. And what the researchers are pointing to is like, once you've got viability and you start to move things into the realms of like material science, engineering, and all of that, it's not that it still can't fail. It's just that things, it's like another step forward in trying to make this technology actually move forward. That's why I think it's particularly exciting. We see a lot of the same issues in nuclear power. One of the bigger problems is around cost, and it's largely because we don't have the capacity to scale, largely because of commercial factors in terms of design, and things don't have economies of scale developed because there wasn't enough investment, and a lot of it was allowed to like rot on the vine over the last 50 years. So scale and the ability to implement on a cheap or relatively cheap and consistent basis is the most important thing. Maybe we'll see it. I don't know. I don't know if we'll see it in our lifetime, but I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just to give people a sense of the time frame that we could be talking about, this fusion reaction has been posited as theoretically possible since literally the 50s. They've been working on this, and it wasn't until December of last year that they were finally even able to demonstrate in a lab under ideal conditions the reaction that they have theorized for, 70 years. So, will it take another 70 years to get out of the laboratory and out into the wider world? Impossible to say, but just to give you a sense of the time frame that it took even to get to this initial step and then their ability to recreate it.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.